So hi everyone, and welcome to the Department of World Arts and Cultures here at UCLA. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that as a land-grant institution, we acknowledge the Gabrielino Tongva peoples as the traditional land caretakers of Tovarna, the Los Angeles Basin and South Channel Islands. So this is actually the third event in the Decolonial Theory and Practice Seminar Series. It's organized by myself, Lily Flores Aguiar, and Rashida Hill. And this series overall kind of approaches questions of decoloniality from the core perspectives that underpin our research and teaching here in WACD. This includes the generation of social theory from cultural phenomena, methodological pathways that emerge from practice-based research, ethnographic conceptualizations of performance and dance, and artistic intervention, of course, as transformative gesture. And we're really delighted to welcome our speaker today, Jime Norte, whose talk is entitled Countermapping Articulates What Is Between. Jime Norte is a Zuni tribal member and has spent over 45 years working professionally to protect and steward cultural and natural resources. He is the CEO of the Colorado Plateau Foundation, which supports regional native communities to protect water and sacred places, ensure food security, and preserve languages and ancestral knowledge. He also serves as the chair of the board of trustees for the Grand Canyon Trust and lives in Zuni, New Mexico. So I'd now like to invite Lily Flores Aguiar to say a little more about today's event. Lily actually took the lead in making Jim's talk here today possible and organized this session. So Lily, thank you so much, and over to you.
Thank you for that introduction. So my name is Lily Flores Aguilar, and I'm a fourth-year graduate student in the World Arts and Cultures Dance Department. And so I just want to give you a little backstory on how I met Jim. So right after completing my undergraduate studies here at UCLA in anthropology, I met Jim at a seminar. We shared interests in archaeological evidence, storytelling, and the arts. Throughout my time as a graduate student, Jim has been a mentor, but also a friend. And his work with Native artists and youth through the decolonial practice and philosophical perspective of countermapping has been central to inspiring my approach to co-developing collaborative methods and thinking about pedagogy as social justice. Making connections to tell stories that are often subsumed, then reemerge through the practice of countermapping. And so I ask, how may we as people navigating within and beyond the limits of higher institutions of education, how can we leverage our positions to be in what is referred to as rightful presence? According to Calabrese, Spartan, and Tan, rightful presence as a justice-oriented political project focuses on the processes of reauthoring rights towards making present the lives of those made missing by the systemic injustices inherent in schooling and the disciplines, with the goal of making both injustice and social change in the here and now visible in classroom practice. How do we expand the classroom to include the various placemaking practices we engage in through our everyday lived experiences? I look forward to exploring these questions with you all. Thank you.
We inherit metaphors from the swifts and the swallows that congregate and build their homes near the springs. To live near water makes sense. And we learn that it is practical to give space to one another, like dispersed anthills across a valley. The immaculate lives of other beings will always offer us lessons and support. Generations before us struggled, but people stood and they got into lines and chanted old words, conjured the beings around them and those above and below. Those acts are part of a universal and dramatic plan, time-tested and appraised, with terms set by nature and metaphor. All drowned and sandblasted people like me know these metaphors as self-evident truths. These and this is our attunement and our knowledge. We do not sit with our ideas entirely indoors. We expose them to the natural forces of the sun, the rain, and wind. We are not paralyzed with indecision. We wake in the morning and decide which foot goes in front of the other as we move. We are not seeking an escape route. On the contrary, we are more potent than ever. We are here to defend and grow our purpose, to make things work, even with so little. My stride is my ultimate measure. As I plant seeds, nurture, and cultivate, harvest, and give thanks, and then reflect. In my most difficult times, my great-grandparents told me this: all things come from a seed. Corn, the tallest trees, birds, fish, humans, and our ideas come from seeds. All creatures breathe in and breathe out, an unseen and vital force. Those creatures live all around us. They are below us, They are above us. They are in all the waters of the world. Many of those creatures have wings, fins, arms, and legs that help them move from one place to another. Like us, some creatures have eyes and ears to perceive things around them. Like us, those creatures respond when the sun rises and winter becomes spring. And like us, those creatures have power beyond their physical bodies. If we think of them, that is their power speaking to us. All things vibrate. The ground sometimes shakes, and stars move across the sky. The ground we stand on and space above are the backbone of our sublime world, and it too has power. We respect the power. We talk to it. And with collective ritual, we help to maintain a cosmological process. This and those things are our attunement and our knowledge. In great difficulty and worry, remember this truth. We are never alone. All the creatures of the universe are not much different than us. We are a family of beings. If we settle our nerves and enter the right frame of mind, we will conjure their powers, and nothing can undo us. We know, as a single species among many, we are not alone. All people, all beings, all the vastness of the land, waters, and sky, and distant galaxies are part of a collective magnificence. Our history will always play out and change, but will remain the same beautiful story. Our purpose will appear from neglected spaces, forgotten peoples, intervals of crisis and rapture, and in the pattern languages of our lives. What I shared with you just now is a map. It's a map of journey, of experience, and yet it is a map that some people say does not exist. It is a map that counters what a high school teacher told me many years ago. you're a dreamer, you're a storyteller, you're writing all the time, and you're going to be a burden on society. And at university, I remember a geology teacher, and I was talking about, well, my grandmother told me something, and he interrupted me and said, that's not what the science says. Some years later in my career, I was sitting at a table with many federal and state agencies talking about some land use planning. And I rose my hand and I said, the perspective of Native peoples should be included in this planning. And the leader of this conversation stood up and she said, whatever. And so what I told you was a map of my journey, but a counter map of that expression coming from those people that thought they knew my map. I'm very fortunate to live as long as I have, for one, and to have a loving mother who told me in some funny ways. She said, when you were born with your eyes wide open, your feet were kicking and running, and your hands were grasping. And she said, I just knew that you were thinking, what's going on? And later I was always saying that, what's going on? What's going on? And she said, well, what's going on? But maybe you should think about where are you going and how did you get here? And I said, well, that kind of makes sense. That kind of makes sense. There was a moment in my life where I was literally plunging to the earth. The earth was coming up fast. Faster, faster, faster. I thought this is probably the end. And there was enough time for me to feel terror. And the moment came. I can't say it was a memory because I was in complete and entire nothingness. I can't even say it was darkness, but it was this entirety of everything. I didn't know in that space if I was a fish, if I was a stone, if I was a rock or a star, anything like that. I had no idea. But I sensed that something was wrong. That was the only thing that told me I'm something. There was a disturbance in the force. Something was not right. Slowly, something told me to check maybe the systems, check my, whatever it is that I am, to check to see what is wrong. And I still didn't figure out what I was, but I was checking what's going on, something, I don't know, something's not right. And things sped up a little bit more. And out of that eternity of space, there actually was, as people would say, a small light. And it did get brighter. And it faded away again. And things sped up. Maybe an analogy would be like a computer rebooting, but something was starting again and I was checking what's going on, what's wrong. And I realized I had appendages, so I was moving something, squeezing that, and then things sped up more, sped up more. And then I heard a beat. It was a steady beat. And I realized I was panting. Then things sped up more. I was panting. And then I saw color. And then I heard someone say, "He's moving." And maybe I shouldn't have, but I reached my arms up, and everything was speeding up quickly. And I said, "I need to get up." And people said, "No, lay down, don't move." And I grabbed somebody's arm in shirt sleeves somewhere, and I stood up. And then I realized I am a being, a human being. And then I took a step. Well, this was like, to me, a big moment. I thought, back to the basics. As I recovered, what is my purpose? It's always those moments in people's lives, right? You always hear about these things. That when their credentials or their lives or families and everything is stripped away, and you think, what are you left with? Why am I here? What is my purpose? And I began to think back about these images of the petroglyph with the spirals. And I spent many years contemplating that. These spirals and what they mean. Many people say they represent migration and movement, and I believe that, because movement, migration is just part of the human experience. Unfortunately, many of us in the world do not have the liberties to migrate as freely as we did. But I also think those spirals are maps. Those maps that represent our time living here and living there, going to this school, meeting this person, and maturing or ripening into our truth. I envy those people who are 12 years old. Well, maybe I don't, but I respect and appreciate those people that are 12 years old and say, I'm going to be an astronaut, and they end up being an astronaut. Or something else, and I think, well, they went straight towards that thing. But for many of us, no, we have to make that journey. We have to make that journey. Live here, live there, learn from mistakes, and ripen in, find our collective truth. This is the right place to live. This is the right place to put this building. This is the right place for other things, and then our individual centering. I told this to one of my friends who is a cartographer, and he said, "Jim, that is a kind of map, but it's not something you're going to see in any land use plan. That's not going to really touch and influence somebody who thinks that that parking lot should be over there." And I said, "But it could be. Why can't it be?" And we began talking more and more about, well, why a conventional map should have north at the top and a legend and scale and other things. And I said, well, I think we live in a time now, especially, where we all think 5 years earlier, we never would have thought the world would be in the state it's in now. 3 years into a pandemic, mayhem in Eastern Europe, all these other things happening. And back to that early question I had, how did we get here? How does the story end? Where are we going? Well, I have to tell you that when it comes to maps, map making, after high school, I started thinking very seriously about maps because that was a time when my grandmother said, you should leave home and travel on a journey and meet new people, get some experiences. Because back then, in high school, nobody ever talked about going to college. It was, you take wood shop, metal shop, auto shop, all those shops, and then build your own home, and then raise family, and you stay with family, which is cool. I like that. But also at the same time, my grandma was saying, you need to learn more. You have a basket of experiences and you need to know where to put them. And so I went hitchhiking for 2 years, sleeping under bridges and the edges of town and finding odd work here and there. But I met interesting people. And I learned several things. Probably the most important thing was to trust my gut, and the other was to believe in the idea of that spiral. So I was on these journeys, and I would go to the gas station, and I got out one of those kind of gas station maps, and I was thinking, I want to go to California, and I want to go to somewhere where there's fish. Remember, I'm from Zuni, New Mexico. And I want to go somewhere where there's fish and there's water. And as I was going through these journeys, I was finding these places, the names that were called San Francisco Peaks, Mount Taylor, Grand Canyon. And I thought, where are those places? I kind of make it out on the map, but I always heard Chimicanikatea, Sunakutyaputuyalan. So why aren't those names on here? And I began to think, well, that's not right. And I thought, well, back to the spiral again. Why did somebody make the spiral in the first place? Somebody tapping on the rock. What was their motivation? So as I was hitchhiking, I was laying on my bedroll at night, somewhere out in the desert. I would have these moments that were sometimes triggered during these journeys. And I thought, you know what? I was lying there on my back, looking up at the stars like that. And I thought one of my earliest memories was when I think I was 3 years old. And I remember standing with my mother, and my mother was holding my hand, and her grip became tighter and tighter and tighter. And I looked up at her, and she had tears coming down her cheek. She told me later, because I said, what was that about? This is maybe when I was 10 years old or 12 years old. And she said, that was when we were visiting your father when he was serving in the Air Force. And it was right outside of the base where he was serving this nation. And that was the time we encountered a whites-only public restroom. I said, okay. But I think I was 3 years old. But I still remember that grip, and I still remember that tearing. And so I set out while I was on this journey. I set out with purpose. I was motivated, and I had purpose, and I said, I'm going to do something about setting the record straight. I'm going to do something about addressing asymmetries of power. And I woke up that next morning, I folded up my bag, and I think I got a piece of cardboard, I got a marker somewhere, and I just wrote Albuquerque. In other words, I was heading back home. On the side of the road, you know, sometimes you stick out your thumb, but those of us that were really clever would write on a cardboard like that. Bring more clarity to where we're going, right? My two favorite words, actually, in English language. First one is hope, and the second one is clarity. So more than just stick my thumb out, I said, this is where I'm going. So on that journey, I returned home. I said, I'm going to go to university. I'm going to go to college. Okay. Tried to get some scholarship, tried to get some help, all the rest. Long story, I finally finished. I was a soils conservationist. I worked in wildlife for a while, did other things, and I eventually a natural resource manager. I had a staff of 83 people I was managing. And we had our GIS office, Geographic Information Systems, and they were making these beautiful, clever maps, computerized maps with a powerful, very useful database. And one time I took one of these maps home, and I was showing my mother. I'm very proud. I said, look what I've been working on with these people. It's a map of our fields. And she looked at it, and she held it out like that, and she adjusted her glasses. She said, I don't know what I'm looking at. And I said, you have to think, imagine you're looking straight down. And she said, I'm not a bird. And I said, Mom, you're right. You're most definitely not a bird. So I thought, there's got to be another way. So I brought some artists together with some cultural and religious leaders from my tribe in Zuni. And we came together for 1 year and talked, ate pizza, and met again and again and again about making new kinds of maps. And we said, you know, we need to make some maps that are beautiful, that have the same colors that people would understand, that would resonate with them, that would be evocative. And these maps would be for Zuni people to better understand why we are the way we are, where we came from, and maybe talk about our hopes and dreams. Maybe they reflect and mirror some of the songs. And so we spent a year just talking about these ideas, these maps. And at the very front was what not to map, because there are certain places and ideas and things that not everybody should know, where I come from. And we created these maps, and actually some years later, I think 32 of them were actually exhibited just not too far from here at the Fowler Museum. It's a map art exhibition. But we took these maps and we exhibited to the people at Zuni, and people would look and approach them. These were beautiful, large oil on canvas. Some of them were acrylic on canvas. Some of them were watercolors. They were beautiful things. And people approached them with families, and they'd look and they'd say, it's like, it's beautiful. And they'd study it, just like the brushstrokes and the concept of space and the colors. And then someone from the family would step forward and say, oh, this is that history of when this happened and the people moved from here to there, and this is, and the whole family was listening, and then another family member would jump in and say, oh yeah, I remember Grandma talking about this, and these maps were just bringing families together. And they refreshed people's memories. And we made some posters of these beautiful maps. And I remember years earlier, when I was making those GIS maps with some of the staff, we had these great computerized generated maps. And we went to the Grand Canyon and we were attending a meeting. And we said, these are important places to the Zuni people. And the staff got these maps and they said, oh, great, thank you for these. And they opened up the filing cabinet, the map cabinet, and slid it in there with these other maps. And they said, great, this is a great resource for us. Thank you. But when we took these posters of these other maps, some of them were of the Grand Canyon, important places, sacred places within the Grand Canyon to us. We took these posters and we said, we have some maps for you. And they looked at it and said, well, we need to get some frames for these. And I was glad it didn't go into the filing cabinet. So even for them, while they didn't completely understand what these maps were about, it had a different impact. And so I've been thinking, again, back to the spiral of modernities, again and again, about the one-size-fit-in-the-box orthodoxies of map making. And I respect them, I should say. I should say that, if I was ever in a situation, maybe in a courtroom, I hope not, if I needed to produce a map, I would use one of those kind of computer-generated maps. Because they become a technocratic standard. You need to use those kinds of maps. But I would use that. But I would also insist on using my own hand-drawn map. This is the way I see it. This is the way I see it on my terms and from my perspective. That's what I would do. Now, we're seeing today, I think it's timely that we would have this moment to consider different kinds of maps, pushing back with maps, counter-mapping. It's timely. We think of the power of communications globally. Conspiracy theories are everywhere. And now, some people are making new kinds of maps that are countering these ideas of voting districts that are harmful. And we know what they're about. Again, it's the asymmetries of power. And so people are making new kinds of maps through an artistic lens that are pushing back on the gerrymandering mapping. I've watched some people come forward and making maps of bird habitats. You would think that it would be paper, two-dimensional, with polygons of habitat. I saw these beautiful maps made by ornithologists who were artistically, creatively thinking, and hung chimes in rooms that mimicked the sound of certain birds, and the room was a certain area, and said the birds over here make this sound, And birds over here. Make this sound. It was brilliant, brilliant. And I thought, why can't we all do this? Why can we all make new kinds of maps and different kinds of maps? We're all map makers, really. From the moment we wake up in the morning, we make choices. As I said, we decide which foot goes in front of the other, we move, and we make choices, sometimes good, sometimes bad, but we make choices. And we're thinking about the day, where we're going to go, and we're thinking that through, we're mapping it. But sometimes we're thinking of it in that way, it's like we're really just ordering these ideas in our head. We're putting together these little vignettes of information that a friend told us, something we read, something we heard on the radio or TV, or we looked up on Google, but we got these little vignettes of information that are sort of out here, and we refer to them. We make choices. We're making maps. Well, some people tell me, Jim, you're getting kind of out there now. I'll say, sorry, man, that's the way I think. If we keep doing the same thing, we're always going to get what we always got. So why not make something new and different? I believe that this time, when I believe we live in a world with damaged people, when we've taken so much from the earth and given so little in return, when a time when we think that this is truly an egalitarian society, I think we should be making new kinds of maps. It can be a narrative, spoken. It can be laid out in a scroll. It can be painted as murals on walls. We can make new kinds of maps that tell others of our hopes and clarity of where we want to be, a world we want to have, and reflecting the memory of how we got to where we are now. One time in my field, when I was little, my grandpa said, it was getting dark, and he said, get some onions. We're going to have beans tonight, and those onions will be good with those beans. And I was maybe this big. I remember saying, okay. So I was digging up some onions and getting all these onions, pulling them up. And I had a big bundle, maybe 50 or 60 onions. And I was carrying them to the truck, and I kept dropping them and falling all over. And my grandpa came to me, just with his memory of the field, he pulled out his pocket knife, which he always had, a pocket knife, and he just turned and walked back to this one corner of the field, and he reached down and cut some yucca. Well, first thing was, he knew exactly where to go. He cut those, he stripped pieces of them, cut the sharp tips off, and just amazing dexterity, just tied some quick knots. And then he got those onions, he helped me, he wrapped up those onions, and he said, one of the first things you need to learn to do as a human being is to listen to people, to listen to yourself, and also how to tie it all together. Maps and our purpose will appear from neglected spaces, from forgotten peoples, intervals of crisis and rapture, and the pattern languages of our lives. I hope this helps you to think differently about maps, places, stories, and journeys. Thank you very much. We were not planning to, but seeing as how we are at a university, I guess we should get some questions. So that's questions, please.
If you have a question, you can raise your hand.
Anybody have a question?
I'll pass the mic to you.
There is a question.
Just gonna sit back now. Amarao Hopa in El Cassandra Pino, Gashkameko Akuma, El Suda. Wati Jim, I actually have met you before. I used to work for the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition, and I was a media and community engagement specialist. And I was just wondering, if you could speak a little more to how we can better carve out spaces for Indigenous knowledge systems and perspectives and storytelling, and how that ties into map making within federal agencies and state agencies, but also in universities as well. Just like trying to create space for Indigenous peoples to have their own creativity shown through, but also acknowledged.
How to, yeah. Actually, so Bears Ears, not to raise myself on any pedestal really, but I worked with Charles Wilkinson and several others really crafting some of the language for the Bears Ears Declaration. I'm very familiar with it. And a part that I really wanted to have and still have hopes for is that there would be a center or institute for traditional knowledge, native traditional knowledge, not traditional ecological knowledge, because I think that's something different, but a center for traditional native knowledge, which would inform the management of Bears Ears. I think it's still possible. I think that what I was talking about, I think it was around 1991 and 1990 when I was at a watershed planning meeting, and I was around with all these other agencies, and back then, it's old school still, 1980s, 1990s, but I said Native people's perspectives need to be included. And that one leader, director, back then it was called the Soil Conservation Service, SCS, and she said, yeah, whatever. Well, that was part of the motivation for me. And I would say, one, many of those managers are probably retired, or they're gone now. And I think there's certainly a different attitude. Not everywhere. As you know, Utah is sort of the deep west, right? But there are some well-intentioned and good people out there still. We have allies, not like we did in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and we have many more allies now. The question is, how can we get our perspectives included in that we're making some big steps. So right now, I'm not getting on a political stage. This isn't a political stage, but the Biden-Harris administration now has in the White House Office of Council of Environmental Quality and the Science and Technology Office, a memo that went out to all federal agencies saying that, well, they said traditional ecological knowledge should be part of informing land management decisions. And at first I thought, wow, that's a big deal. But then I thought, oh, but I don't like the idea of traditional ecological knowledge because my personal opinion, I think it works great for some tribes that are reclaiming their knowledge, where it will be in English and maybe using science as an affirmation of traditional knowledge. Whereas in other places where where their language is still strong and they still have a lot to offer in terms of their real traditional knowledge, I think there's a difference. So I was on a phone. So one thing is, one way to get there is for people like you, get the right tools here, learn the system, which you're part of learning already. Learn the system. Unfortunately, we have to learn, because that's part of understanding a pattern language, right? How do things work? Rather than, this has to change, that's got to change. Well, I can shout all day about that, but I know the shortcut, or I know how to write something that's going to make that change. And then we get to that, we open that door, we get our foot in, and we don't let it out. And we train ourselves to be at the table, not to impress people, but because we have the right tools, we can say, I know exactly how this works. And I am going to influence change with the right words, with the right experience of policy or law behind me. I can come to the table and say, I know how this works. I know how to make this happen. So that's one, getting the right tools. And I don't like to use the analogy of it's a game, but we have to know how the game is played. Right? So that's one. The other is, I hope and I believe still that people as human beings are sentient people. They have feelings and they understand what is beautiful and what isn't. People are motivated by music, songs. I mean, if you go to a political campaign, right, they got songs playing in the background, motivating people and all that. I was influenced by, what was that song? The ecology song, Mercy, Mercy Me. And so people can be pushed and nudged and motivated by art if it's done well. So there's a left brain hemisphere approach and a right brain hemisphere approach. I think if we just do one, we may not get where we want to be, but if we use both, I think we can get there. And so the landscape's different. The good news is the landscape's different than it was even 10 years ago, even 6 years ago, right? Different administration change, and even 2 years ago, it's different, right? The landscape's different. We know how the game's played. We have the right tools. We know we can speak multiple languages. You know, we see the world in enhanced ways. Sometimes I think as Native people, we're like riding horses, gladiator style, with one foot is on this horse of tradition and old things. 600 generations of experience, and the other foot is on a horse of modernity. We're doing both. There's nothing we can't do. We're as smart as everybody else. We can be even smarter sometimes. Yeah. Anyone else?
Another question, another comment? If no one else has a question at this point, I'd actually have a comment or a question, which is, I'd like to, well, first of all, thank you so much for this deeply moving and profoundly a reconfiguration of ontological positioning talk that you've given us. I really wanted to ask you, when I look at maps, I see as if it were a freeze frame of time when I look at Western maps. It's almost like time stands still, time is frozen at the point at which the map is created, and that's its purpose, to solidify time. And it's that way that the colonizer has managed to, over hundreds of years, say, pre-1492, post-1492, pre-Columb, these kinds of divisions in time that presuppose a very static idea of what time is. And I was really fascinated in when you started speaking about not just the kind of the orientation of the map, and the series of maps that you worked on, but also the depth of those maps, and how those maps contain somehow, I understood, perhaps a kind of a temporal complexity, which could represent much more than just this sort of freeze frame. Perhaps, I don't know if that makes much sense, but it would be fascinating to hear you speak a little bit more about depth.
Well, we all have heard of languages and words and languages, how languages as a code can be either limiting or, I think, certainly open new ideas and create a larger palette. So what we want is the broadest spectrum of ideas and experiences possible. Some languages are limited. Right? Some ways of thinking are limited. I don't know exactly how many words are in the English language, or in the Chinese language, or the Yupik language, and so on. But when I heard when my aunties, who gave me a name when I was little, like, if she's back here and she says my name, I'll know which aunt it is. I don't even have to see her. If she said Saitete, I'll know which aunt that is. And I immediately, I go into this other world. Like when you're scratching a dog's belly and its leg kind of sticks out, you know. It's like, I know who that is, but also there's this beautiful image. That name means morning, sunrise, gold sunrise light on corn leaves with dew, with a light breeze that is shaking the leaf, and so it's shimmering. All of that just in one word. Right? And that only happens in the rainy season. In the Southwest during the monsoon, there's enough humidity to create dew in the morning, and it's only in the season when there's corn growing, and only it's in the morning light where it's kind of gold. And it's in the valley, so when the cool air is settling down the valley in the early morning, the leaves are just shaking a little bit. All of those things coming together at once. And so to me, that is also a kind of map. And if we use expression, whether it's woven in textiles, painted on ceramics, performed as dance, if we can use that power of a million new ideas and our creativity in a way that we know people have accessibility to it, I think we can create change there. So there's so many different ways of looking at the world, obviously. And I think new kinds of maps, as I said, they don't have to be on paper or two-dimensional. They can be a performance. And our people, as I said, when they get into lines, when they stand up, they build beautiful things. I mean, think back, and that was all, the Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, all these places, that was without writing. That was without any script. How did they do that? People were motivated somehow. And I think all people in their nature can be motivated in different ways. It's just how we know how people learn. How do people understand place? Some people say, oh, I know that place. I'm close to the ocean. I smell it. Some people say, I'm near that food market. I can smell that something, you know, that fried something. There's so many ways that we can reference ourselves to place. I think we've been so limited in how we're doing it. But you all, you have so much opportunity. So much opportunity. You're hearing from other people, not just me, but telling you, there's so many ways you can do this. There's so many ways you can do this and motivate people. Think about great leaders in the world that motivated people to do incredible things. And it wasn't just all in writing. It wasn't all mathematical. I'm not disparaging any of those things, but people have motivated great things through oratory, through paintings, through all sorts of things, through film and so on. So there's many ways of representing place. And if we want to call it maps, we can call them maps or not. Thank you all very much. Maybe we can put this piece online somewhere.
Thank you all so much for attending. Tomorrow we'll be having a workshop on counter mapping, so we invite you all to join us in Kaufman 1000 at 1 p.m., correct? 1 to 2 p.m. and all are welcome. This will be recorded, so it's a prerequisite to have attended or watched Jim's seminar. So if you want to invite someone who would be interested in exploring this creative methodology, please feel free to bring more folks. Thank you.
Just also very briefly to say that we will be having dinner as well tonight with Jim. And please, the name of the restaurant, Lily, I can't remember, but it's quite close to here, Shamsheri. We have also the dinner will be, I don't know quite how to say this, like the dinner will be complimentary, it's part of the event. So we'll be going for dinner. We haven't actually fixed the time yet, but we should fix the time. We should say
5:30?
5:30. 5:30 this evening at Shamsheri.
Yeah, you'll be reimbursed for dinner, so if you just save your receipt and you send it to the department.
That's exactly the phrase I was looking for, reimbursement. So thank you so much, all of you, for attending, and thank you once again to Jim for this deeply moving and very effective talk. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.